Yesterday, a letter from His Holiness the Dalai Lama was read, and in this letter, he spoke of the profound promise that arises when science and spirituality join hands in the service of humanity. It is at this very intersection that our next keynote speaker, Dr. Lisa Miller, has dedicated her life's work. A professor, researcher, and best-selling author, Dr. Miller is pioneering a new understanding of how spirituality and mental health are inseparably linked. Through her scholarship, she has illuminated pathways of meaning, resilience, and well-being, helping us see that when we nourish the inner life, we strengthen the outer one as well. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Lisa Miller.
Hi. Hello. It's so nice to be here because from here, as much as I have enjoyed every speaker, I've equally enjoyed looking at us. And from here, I can see us even more fully without ignoring the speaker. So I find it extraordinary that from here at Emory, like a great fountain, a wellspring of joy and spirit and sacred energy pours forth throughout Atlanta and around the world. And I think it's a time to honor the profound change in our global society that can come in the hands of really relatively few. So I'm joining you standing up in spirit as a recovering back patient. In spirit, I'm standing. I'm here to share with you a scientific look at spiritual life. Now, as many of you know, for much of the 20th century, there was a discussion that I am a rigorous scientist. I only take to be true that which has been shown through the empirical method. And a second camp, which is I know this in my direct experience to be the case. I don't care what science has examined or not. Largely a split. But now increasingly we've heard and we continue to see that science and spiritual awareness go hand in hand. That we are knowers in many forms. And that science is a lens. We can take a lens and look up like a telescope or a microscope, look down. An MRI study, a long-term clinical course studies, these are all lenses. Science is a form of witness. And in that sense, I find it like testimony. One by one, we stand up, the testimony of us as a chorus in a study sample. I will narrate loudly. How about that? Let's sit here. So, you are exceedingly important. What science as a lens has allowed us to see is that every single one of us in this room, every single one of us in the world, is born an innately spiritual being. How do we know this? Through the lens of science, we can use a twin study to determine the extent to which any capacity is inborn versus environmentally formed. So temperament, I invite you to reflect on if you've known more than one baby in your life. Might temperament have something to do with heredity? Right. So I had 3 children. The center child, who asked to go by center child, slept through the night at 18 months, right? So 4 times a night, I'd walk across the house and soothe the baby, right? Her temperament was disquieted. She's allowed me to share this much. Environment was the soothing. By the time we're 30, our temperament is half inborn, half environmentally formed. IQ, you're all very bright. You're sitting here at an epicenter, global university. You were born smart. IQ is 2/3 innate, 1/3 formed. The capacity through which we experience spiritual life, and more specifically, a transcendent connection, a connection, if you want to say, with the infinite consciousness field, if your word is God, the universe, however you understand source. And I've yet to, in my whole life, hear anyone argue for 2 sources of all life. So I think we can go with source. That capacity is yours. You were born with this capacity, and it is everyone's, but it is 1/3 innate, 2/3 environmentally formed, which means that the passing of the torch, we don't make the fire, but we carry it. How you walk the walk and the transparency of how you talk the walk. Would you like to sit with me, narrating right action, pointing out the noble truths, transparency into the sacred landscape, the ever-presence of the infinite consciousness field in and through our lives, is the 2/3 embrace. The clock always runs on the possibility of our impact, which doesn't mean we have to be perfect. Parent of 3, right? Definitely far from perfect. But we can revisit our errors as transformative, both for those who we've touched and also bring along our children or students. So you are tremendously important. The passing of the torch, whether it is the intergenerational transmission of spiritual life from teacher to student, from grandparent, tremendously impactful, grandparent to parent to child, or grandparent to child. Or you choose with love and commitment to become someone who passes the torch. So we talk a lot about the intersection of spirituality and religion. For 2/3 of people in the United States, they say my deep spiritual life, the part of me through which I contact the infinite, the sacred guidance, love, has been shaped by my faith tradition or my practice, my wisdom tradition. About 1/3 of people say I'm spiritual but not religious, in nature, in art. No matter where we go or how we talk about it, we're using the same circuits in the brain. So the sense of oneness on the top of a mountain, Mount Rainier, runs the same circuits as someone on their knees in the pews in a Catholic church. There's one spiritual brain and we all have it. Nobody's left out. When we choose the 2/3 embrace to strengthen our spiritual awareness day in and day out through meditation, through right action, for some through prayer or reading of sacred text, we literally strengthen the cortex. We build the muscle across the regions of what I call our awakened brain. We are awakening, as is our birthright. This study, published in JAMA Psychiatry, was the first of a decade of studies that we conducted on the neural correlates of spiritual awareness, the awakened brain. The huge regions that you see in red, normally we jump up and down. Those of you who run MRI studies, we found it, right? Little speck, maybe 2. These are huge regions of cortical thickness associated with sustained spiritual life over 8 years. What's remarkable is that with 85% overlap, those very same regions are not thick but thin in recurrent major depression, offering some evidence that sustained spiritual life can be neuroprotective against the downward spiral of major depression. Now, certainly in the fabric of life, there can be times of struggle and pain and suffering, but the downward spiral of the inculcating feeling of the abyss has a spiritual response to catch us. And that is neuroprotective. When we looked 1 year out, what does a big, thick red brain today say about how I'll do a year from now? I have lower symptoms. We have lower symptoms of depression. If we say, what does it say about how we're going to be doing many years from now? We're at 75% decreased likelihood for recurrence of major depression. And that goes up to 90%. When we otherwise are at high risk because we're in a hailstorm of risk factors, because of genetics, because of the climate, the social climate of our home or our community. 90% protected. If I said, here's a pill, and you can give this to every student in your class, and make sure you take one yourself, and it will protect you 90% against the worst depression of your life, who wouldn't take a shot at that? Why such a robust protective benefit? Open question, right? as scientists, I've done this science for 30 years. That's what I think about every day. My poor husband is like, what are you thinking about? A number? I'm like, yes, I'm thinking about a number. And here's some numbers that I find remarkable. McKinsey did a beautiful global study of 16,000 people, consulting with some of us scientists. And when we build what they called spiritual health, strengthening, if you will, the red brain, we're nearly 4 times more likely to have good mental health. We are nearly 2.5-fold more likely to have good social health and twice as likely to have good physical health. These are the 4 pillars of health as had been put forward by former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. Okay? Physical, mental, social, and spiritual health. I presented this a week and a half ago to 1,000 cadets at West Point, and one stood up at the mic and said, "Don't you think, ma'am, spiritual health is the one that actually cuts across them all?" I thought that was extraordinary. And I said, yes, I do. I do. I don't envision 4 legs of a table. I envision the spiritual core of the whole person. That is who you are. And it's true all around the world. Thank you. So when we strengthen the spiritual core, what relevance does that have? Whether it's through meditation, prayer, strengthening the awakened brain to our current mental health crisis. Well, traditionally, we've located diagnosis at the level of the individual. He meets criteria for MDD and substance abuse, dual diagnosis. She is at risk for suicide. But if 55% of Gen Z meets criteria for at least a moderate level of a disease of despair, which means painful and imposing on, yes, outward functionality, but their path, then perhaps it makes more sense to look at the tidal wave, our culture and climate surrounding young people. 40 years ago, in a good attempt to be inclusive, a good attempt, our country said, okay, we're not going to talk about spirituality and religion in the public square. So City Hall, take down the menorah, Hanukkah menorah, the Christmas tree. We're not going to talk about this in the boardroom. We're not going to talk about this in the school. Well, 40 years of an ice age on the free expression of spiritual life of the heart has led to a non-conversant generation. 40 years is long enough for someone to grow up, have a child or two who grow up, and live in a time where the majority of peers have not meditated or prayed by the side of an elder, have not read any sacred text or been part of ceremony. We've never had this condition. And with the ascension and the diseases of despair has been a statistically related concomitant decline in spiritual life. The two go hand in hand. Where's the data? Well, here is the data. American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. If we do strengthen what I call the spiritual core, remember, ma'am, doesn't it just go across all of this, right? The spiritual core from which comes emotional and mental and physical health. What can be said? A standard deviation in a nationally representative sample, a standard deviation above as compared to below the mean, and a strong personal spiritual life. Again, whether I am Hindu or Muslim or spiritual and not religious, Catholic, Christian, whatever my religion may be, or if I'm spiritual and not religious, a standard deviation above as compared below is associated with an 80% decreased relative risk of addiction, going through the window of risk of lifetime struggle, late adolescence, 70% less likely to take dangerous risks, which can be a backdoor, latent suicide, right? 75% less likely to get depressed, but every young person will get depressed. There is a developmental depression, the knock at the door, through which can come, what is my purpose? What is my meaning? Actually, what is the purpose written into life? Is there in it? I can share with you that I am overwhelmed with joy to see that at Emory, the notion that meaning can be written into life is alive and well, because it is not the pedagogical norm. And the air and water of most universities is a latent nihilism, and it's making our kids sick. And the air and water, to the point it brings me to tears, of many universities is a radical materialism, which is making the kids feel meaningless. Because meaning is not imputed and it's not fabricated. It's found through being consciously open. Meaning is already written into the fabric of reality. And when we are an open system, as we're designed to be, life unfolds in an entirely different way. To the epidemic of our time, the rate of death by suicide rivals the rate of death by accident as the number one killer of high school students. And yet, in a study of studies, a meta-analysis, it was shown that when spiritual life is shared in the Sangha, shared in the classroom, we are 82% less likely to take our life. 4/5, we have the antidote to the greatest epidemic of our time. We have it. It's in the room. You're the torchbearers. There is a surge. As much as a time, how am I doing? 5 minutes or 1 minute? I'm good? Okay. There is a surge with puberty. It's marked, if you look at longitudinal twin studies, by from the inside out a biological clock. Bring, pushing what is my meaning and purpose, pushing the existential wondering. We can see a 50% increase in the heritable contribution, which means ready or not, hardwired, just like when I was 42, I needed glasses. At 16, I'm starting to wonder, and by 19, my life depends on it. What is the meaning and purpose? And I don't mean, am I going to be a doctor or lawyer? I mean, the ultimate purpose as a soul on earth, as an emanation of life itself, written into life. Who am I as a soul on earth, and what is the nature of life in its deepest inherent being? And we are built for a quest in these very dark and occluded times. We are potentiated at the level of the red brain. We are built and ready in suffering to start to awaken. The sudden awareness that comes as we sit in meditation, the voice of hearing God, the vision in our mind's eye, the sudden intuitive sense of peace that we're loved and held, the guidance. These forms of knowing are awakened forms of knowing. And despair opens into a far greater landscape, a radiant, bright landscape. We are built in our hardwired birthright that suffering, developmental depression, is a knock at the door to awakening. And it doesn't just happen once with late adolescence and emerging adulthood. It comes back in midlife, I promise. And the data does too. And again in the ascension to elderhood, because as we expand in our hardwired capacity, it can feel as if we're with a half-empty glass of spirituality. And that differential is our opportunity. It can feel pretty empty. It can be an existential pain, a not enoughness, which in a culture of narcissism is interpreted as, oh, I'm not enoughness, right? Or maybe my poor spouse isn't enoughness, or I don't have enoughness, right? But it's actually an expansion of our being. It's an invitation. The knock at the door of developmental depression across all three bridges beckons us to awakening. And when we say yes to the knock at the door, there is nothing in the clinical or social sciences as profoundly protective against despair, depression, and MDD, major depression, in the next decade. This is our birthright. We have the antidote. When we realize our awakened knowing, when we strengthen our capacity for intuition, mystical awareness, a gut instinct, knowing in your mind's eye, alongside empiricism, I do it every day, logic, right? We do that every day. We get a lot of that. We're very, very, very good at logic and empiricism, intuition, mysticism, and draw awakened awareness in line with tactics and strategy, achieving awareness. We can interconnect the regions of the brain. We published this about probably 6-8 years ago. And what you see here is that when we have an inspired experience, a realization, a moment of illumination, and then send that to discernment, or when we're churning on a question and then send it to who some might call their higher power, the universe or God, When we bring into dialogue awakened knowing and achieving knowing, our lives become one of quest. Am I going to marry this guy? Will I ever get into this school? And then suddenly I knew the universe had a path, a plan for me. Or we feel something we've never felt before at the top of Mount Rainier. And coming down the mountain, think about, how do I bring this to my family and my classroom? This integration myelinates the tracks between organic forms of knowing, if you will, inborn epistemologies, paves the highway for a more interconnected brain, which we know is a more creative and innovative brain. Innovative in our work, most importantly, innovative in our precious lives. This is who we are. We are built to be awakened. You are the torchbearers, bringing light. And as you walk the walk and talk the walk, others are liberated and even enlivened to do the same. Thank you.